The boardroom was silent. Not the kind of silence that comes from respect. No, this was the uneasy kind, the kind that hums with the sound of people realizing the ground beneath them has shifted. I adjusted the cuff of my silk blouse, feeling the smooth fabric against my skin. My hands didn't shake this time. They used to. Back then, I would grip my pen so tightly my knuckles turned white, just to stop them from trembling. But today, I leaned back in the leather chair at the head of the table, my chair, and let the quiet work for me. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our Manhattan office, the city glittered under a late morning sun. Below, yellow cabs weaved through traffic like threads in a restless tapestry. My gaze drifted to the faces around the table, men and women in sharp suits, some shifting uncomfortably, others trying to mask their curiosity. "Shall we begin?" I said. My voice was steady, calm. Too calm for them to know yet just how much power I held in this moment. The irony wasn't lost on me. Years ago, these same people, or their predecessors, refused to let me finish a single sentence. My ideas were waved away, my presence tolerated but never valued. Now they were waiting for me to speak, and I had every intention of making them listen. 5 years earlier, the same building felt like enemy territory. I was 27, still in my first real corporate job, clutching my presentation slides like they were armor. My manager, Richard Campbell, had assured me I'd have the floor during the quarterly strategy meeting. I'd worked for weeks on that pitch, market research, projections, even a mock-up campaign. The moment I started speaking, though, it was as if my voice dissolved into the hum of the air conditioning. "I think we should," I began. Right, interrupted Greg Morrison, one of the senior VPs, waving his hand like he was shooing a fly. "What we need is a bigger spend on digital ads." He turned to another director, completely bypassing me, and the conversation moved on without so much as a pause. I sat there, lips parted, my throat tightening. My heart thudded against my ribs. My hand under the table clenched so hard my nails dug half-moons into my palm. When I tried again, offering a data point to support my plan, Richard's voice cut in, smooth, practiced, patronizing. "Emily's idea is interesting, but we can circle back later." We never did. That day, I left the boardroom with my cheeks burning and my proposal still neatly printed in my folder, unread, unconsidered. It was my grandmother, Evelyn, who found me sitting on the fire escape that night, the cool New York air brushing my face. She pressed a small gold fountain pen into my hand, the one she'd used when she was the only woman in her law school class. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice a mix of steel and warmth, "there are 2 ways to be heard. You can ask for a seat, or you can build the table yourself." Her words settled in my bones. I didn't know it then, but that was the last day I'd ever beg for someone else's permission to speak. The next morning, I typed my resignation letter on that pen's ink, bold, deliberate strokes, and slid it across Richard's desk without a single tremor in my hand. I walked out of that office into a gray Manhattan drizzle, my heels splashing through the puddles, with nothing but a pen in my bag and a fire in my chest. Leaving that job was like stepping off a cliff. No safety net, no backup plan, just the echo of my grandmother's words in my head. I started small, consulting for a friend's boutique marketing agency out of her cramped Brooklyn apartment. The pay barely covered rent, but it gave me something I hadn't had in years: my voice. Every idea was mine to pitch, test, and fight for. When I landed my first solo client, a struggling organic skincare brand run by a woman named Claire Simmons, I poured everything into their campaign. I stayed up until 3 a.m., learning SEO strategies, teaching myself graphic design, figuring out the language of contracts and invoices. I burned through coffee and optimism in equal measure. Claire introduced me to her network. One project led to another, then another. Soon I was juggling 5 clients, then 10. My tiny studio apartment became a command center, mood boards taped to the walls, financial spreadsheets open on my laptop, stacks of shipping samples next to my bed. A year in, I met Marcus Reed, a venture capitalist who, unlike most men in that world, didn't talk over me. He listened. He asked questions. When I pitched him an idea for a full-scale brand consulting firm focused on women-owned businesses, he didn't smirk. He offered seed funding. I named the company Aurora Strategies. We operated quietly, deliberately. No flashy press releases, no loud social media. I wanted to grow without attracting the attention of the very people who once dismissed me. By year 3, Aurora had offices in New York and Chicago, a team of 30, and a portfolio that included national campaigns. We doubled revenue every year. I bought a loft in Tribeca. Understated, modern, the kind of place you'd never guess belonged to someone running a multi-million-dollar firm. I kept my success hidden from my old colleagues. On LinkedIn, my profile simply said consultant. No titles, no details. My grandmother used to call it quiet power. Still, there were nights I'd look at that gold fountain pen on my desk and remember the humiliation in that boardroom. It wasn't bitterness that kept me going anymore. It was the knowledge that my worth had never depended on their recognition. Then came the email. The subject line read, "Consulting request, urgent." The sender was none other than Richard Campbell. Their company, the same one I had walked away from, was in trouble. A failed expansion, sinking profits, investors losing confidence. And they wanted me to come in and assess strategic options. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I poured myself a glass of Cabernet, opened the window, and let the city sounds drift in. I thought about the girl who once left this company with nothing but a pen. 5 days later, I replied, "Let's meet. Your boardroom or mine." The elevator ride up to the 42nd floor felt longer than I remembered. Same mirrored walls, same faint scent of leather and disinfectant. But this time, my reflection looked different, sharper, steadier. My navy blazer fit like armor. My heels clicked with the rhythm of someone who knew exactly where she was going. When the doors opened, Richard was waiting. He looked older, thinner hair, deeper lines around his mouth, but the practiced corporate smile was still in place. "Emily," he said, shaking my hand. "Glad you could make it." "I bet you are," I replied lightly. He led me into the boardroom. It hadn't changed much. The same long mahogany table, the same skyline view. Around it sat the board members. Some faces I recognized, others new. Their expressions were polite, guarded. "Before we begin," Richard started, "we just want to say how much we appreciate you coming in on short notice. We've heard you've built quite a reputation in consulting." There it was, the faint condescension, as if consulting were a polite euphemism for something smaller, less significant. I let them talk. For 20 minutes, I listened as they outlined their problems: declining sales, loss of market share, an upcoming shareholder vote that could cost them control. They spoke quickly, anxiously, as though speed could disguise desperation. Finally, I leaned forward. "I think there's something you should know before we discuss solutions." The room stilled. I reached into my bag, pulled out a slim folder, and slid it across the table toward Richard. He opened it, scanning the pages, first with confusion, then shock. "These are purchase agreements," he said slowly. "Correct," I replied. "Over the past 6 months, Aurora Strategies has been acquiring shares of your company through various holding firms. As of this morning, we hold 51%. The silence that followed was almost sweet. "In other words," I continued, "this isn't a consulting visit. This is a transfer of leadership." One board member, a man in a charcoal suit, laughed nervously. "This is highly irregular." "No," I cut in, my voice steady. "What's irregular is ignoring the people capable of saving you until your company is on fire. What's irregular is silencing a voice because you don't think it matters. Well, I have the floor now. And the table. And the building." Richard's face was pale. "You bought us?" "Yes. And I intend to rebuild this company, but not the way it's been run before." I stood, walking slowly around the table, meeting each person's eyes. In this boardroom, no one gets talked over. No ideas get dismissed because of who's speaking. That's my first policy. If you can't live with that, resign now. The weight of the moment hung in the air. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. I returned to my seat, uncapped my grandmother's gold fountain pen, and signed the official transfer documents in front of them. "This," I said, setting the pen down, "is how I make sure I'm heard." No one interrupted me. I didn't waste time. The moment the ink dried, I looked around the table and started laying out the new order. "First," I said, "Richard, you'll step down as CEO effective immediately. You'll remain on as an advisor for the next 90 days to help with transition if you choose to stay. Your expertise is valuable, but only if it's offered without ego." His jaw tightened, but he nodded. Second, I turned to the man in the charcoal suit. "Greg Morrison, yes, I remember you. You'll remain in operations, but your role will be reviewed quarterly. And if I hear of anyone being interrupted in a meeting, that will be your last day here." "Understood." He swallowed hard. "Understood." I moved on, scanning faces. Every manager will attend mandatory leadership training, with emphasis on inclusion, collaboration, and respect. Performance will be measured not only on revenue but on how your teams feel working under you. A few of the younger women at the table glanced at each other, faint smiles tugging at their lips. "As for strategy, we're restructuring. That means some divisions will close, others will expand. I'll meet with department heads individually to discuss where you fit in this new vision. There will be opportunities for growth, but not for those unwilling to change." I paused, letting that settle. This company failed because it became an echo chamber. Too many of the same voices saying the same things, shutting out innovation. That ends today. If you're here to contribute, not just to defend your corner. Richard leaned back in his chair, studying me. "And if we don't agree with your approach?" I smiled. "Then you'll walk out the same way I did years ago, but without the pen." A ripple of nervous laughter moved around the table, but no one spoke up. "I'm offering each of you a choice," I continued. "Stay and help build something better, or step aside. But understand this, the only way forward is together, and with respect for every voice in this room." One by one, they nodded. "Good," I said, gathering my notes. "We'll reconvene in 48 hours. By then, I expect proposals from each department on how you plan to adapt to the new direction. And remember, I'll be listening to everyone." I capped my grandmother's pen, feeling its familiar weight in my hand. In this very room, years ago, I had been invisible. Now, every eye followed me as I stood. The changes didn't happen overnight, but they happened. By the end of the first quarter, the energy in the building was different. Meetings ran without a single interruption. Fresh ideas poured in from people who had once sat silent at the back of the room. Richard stopped trying to push back against the new culture. In fact, I caught him once in a conference room, quietly listening while a junior analyst presented a pitch. He didn't interrupt her once. Greg still looked like he'd swallowed a lemon most mornings, but he followed the rules. And when I overheard him cutting someone off, I called him out immediately in front of the entire team. He never did it again. Some board members left, unable or unwilling to adjust. Others surprised me, embracing the shift, championing voices they'd never bothered to hear before. The company's numbers began to climb, but more importantly, the people inside it began to breathe. One evening, long after the building had emptied, I sat alone in the boardroom. The city lights spilled across the table, casting long shadows over the polished wood. In front of me was my grandmother's gold fountain pen. I ran my fingers over its smooth barrel, remembering the night she placed it in my hand. "You can ask for a seat, or you can build the table yourself." I had built more than a table. I had built a room, one where every chair mattered. Closing my notebook, I stood, my heels echoing against the marble floor as I headed for the elevator. They refused to let me speak. I murmured to myself, a smile curling at the edges of my lips. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside. So I made sure I owned the room.